Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar, which is hosted by the Scottish Alliance for Food. So my name is Dave McBay, and I'm going to be chairing today's session. Thank you very much for joining us. So just to give a little bit about information about the Scottish Alliance for Food, or SCAF, before we get started. This is the 10th webinar in a series that's held every 6 weeks on various different themes and topics. And so very broadly, SCAF looks to find a food future that's good for both planet and human health without jeopardizing culture and tradition. And this final part, culture and tradition, is especially relevant for our presentations today. So there are various different parts of SCAF, and this webinar is hosted by Theme 3, which looks at culture and tradition. And we have 3 fantastic speakers today. And they're each going to look at different ways food is used to communicate culture, heritage, and national identity through a number of different mediums, writing, social media, and podcasts. So we're going to begin with Dr. Anna Tommins, who will introduce her forthcoming book, Communicating Scotland Through Food, and explore how food narratives have shaped ideas of Scotland from devolution right through to today. And then we're going to hear a joint presentation from Dr. Lindsay Middleton and Peter Gilchrist, who will share their experience using podcasts to tell food stories and reflect on the role of culinary heritage in wider cultural conversations. So the presentations are going to be about 15 to 20 minutes each, and we're going to finish with a joint question and answer session. So please do feel free to pop your questions into the chat or Q&A box as we go along. So without further delay, we're going to start with our first guest speaker, Dr. Anna Tommins. So Anna is a reader in Media and Communications and Associate Head of Division of Media, Communications and Performing Arts at Queen Margaret University in Edinburgh. She's a long-standing research interest in food, communication and identity, and is the founder of the Biennial Conference on Food and Communication. So Anna has published widely on food discourse across the UK and Europe, and her forthcoming edited collection, Communicating Scotland Through Food, looks at how food is used to construct and challenge national identity in Scotland, particularly since devolution. So with that, Anna, over to you.
Thank you very much, Dave, for this very nice introduction, and hello to everybody. So today I wanted to talk to you about our forthcoming book, which we're putting together with my colleagues from North Carolina University, Ashley Stokes and Maria Mishak, who worked with me at QMU and just finished her PhD. We have called the book for now Communicating Scotland Through Food from Devolution to Possible Futures. It is in the making, but it's coming hopefully out early next year. The main question of this book is something around food's relationship to Scotland and its national identity, more or less. We ask what food defines Scotland and how the representation or construction help distinguish it from the rest of the UK, from Europe and the rest of the world, from the devolution to present. And of course, we limit ourselves to this year of 1999, that is the devolution, the start of that process, because we believe that it is an interesting kind of milestone where maybe Scotland and its politicians start to think of themselves differently. Or maybe not, maybe not. This is our assumption. So we have some sub-questions like how these national representations intersect with questions of gender, class, race, place, authenticity, time, and tradition. We are interested in questions like, does reimagined Scottish national food emerge bottom-up from eaters and producers, or top-down from government, from culture and media institutions? How something becomes a national food, and also how such representations change. So we want to look at it, from all kinds of angles. I have a picture here of these beautiful langoustines to partially provoke you. But it is a picture from visitscotland.com, and it's part of this series of, Scottish food and drink, what to eat when you're in Scotland. And of course, this, thinking around what places like, tourist boards say to us that are Scottish foods that we should try is a nice start to start thinking about what actually counts as Scottish food, what we understand as Scottish food, and who promotes this Scottish food. And this is part of this interest that we have in this book. Now, the wider question, of course, is why we do that. Why we want to know something like that? Why we would like to spend our time analyzing and understanding the meanings surrounding food in Scotland? Partially because, as such work does, it helps us understand the role of food and how this food, how food plays a role in Scotland's past, present, and future. It helps us understand what foods are there and how are they understood. We have come to this because we have identified a gap in this respect in the literature. There is some work. It's not like that there isn't, but there is some work on it, in particular on whiskey, unsurprisingly, in relationship to Scotland and branding and marketing. Christine Knight published really interesting research on deep fried Mars bar and how this promotion or understanding of deep fried Mars bar and its connection to the Scottish national identity, helps perpetuate, helps really to sustain or drive issues around health. Then you have Knight and Fraser stuff on haggis. Fraser works quite a lot on haggis herself and the construction of haggis as Scottish national food. Here I need to say to those who maybe do not come from this area of studies that we are thinking of national identity and foods as constructed, something that is not just existing in nature as such. We understand them as socially constructed. We create these things as national symbols, socially, culturally. There is some work that I've done together with Christine Knight on Scotland in UK food television. We look at travel logs and ways in which Scotland's representation in UK food television changes and is continuously changing. And then you have work from our colleagues in the US that look at the diaspora and how Scottish food relates to the identities in the US. This is Ashley Stokes' work and Wendy Atkinson. And there is other stuff for sure. This is really just kind of flavor. And so partially this work that we're doing is going to contribute to this understanding of how these foods can be understood socially and culturally in Scotland. We would also like to help shape future discussions around important connections between food and the questions of national identity, in particular in health, political, economic, and other communications. We think that understanding this will help with communicating better messages around food when we come to that. In relationship to this, we have identified some questions like how Scottish food messages may cultivate citizen mistrust or trust, complicate governmental relationships, economic outcomes, impede food policy development, and negatively influence food producers or positively influence food producers. So that sort of stuff is there. Of course, we can't pass this without looking at the deep fried Mars bar, which is a rather curious kind of connection to Scotland. Of course, quite recent one, but nevertheless, if you're a tourist, this is what you are told to come and try. And a lot of Scottish people will tell you that this is not what they eat every day, but this is not the point of it, of course. The point of this connection between the food and national identity is that it serves, in this case, other purposes, maybe to intrigue tourists, gives something different, something that they find surprising to try. And of course, to Scottish people to ridicule this and maybe, I don't know, laughingly associate to it. As my students have told me many times, this is what is to be done with it. It's not to be taken seriously. We take a critical perspective. We want to look at national foods, the heritage, from a perspective of more like a process of how they become seen as national foods, how they become seen as something that's heritage. Of course, this is not to question the heritage as such. Of course, here I have a very nice picture for you of heritage potatoes from Shetland that are on the, I think, slow foods arc of taste, because it is the kind of a traditional potato that grows particularly well in Scotland, and it's adapted to its climate and land and all that sort of stuff. There is definitely, a value in it, in having these kinds of heritage products and thinking about them from a perspective of heritage and what really we feel belongs and we associate with Scotland. But for our purposes, we also want to see how these products that we understand as heritage, how they become heritage. Are they just there? Of course not. We know that, that they don't just exist as such in nature as heritage. They are made to be heritage through communicative work, through image, and so on. And we think that this will help us also understand how change happens in food discourse. Okay. All of these things, as I said earlier, on the understanding that our food is what counts as national food, is constructed through language, through images, and the way we talk about them through years, through decades. Here I have in this purple color a question that I was sent from somebody who registered, and the question is, how would you study the way food heritage is presented on social media? I think that here I can say, with relationship to some of the articles that we see in our book, very often we have articles that relate to social media, linked Instagram in particular, looking at how the role of local the local foods is constructed in these social media accounts. And of course, how would you study? Of course, this is a big discussion to be had, but I guess we have in this book, from various perspectives, we look at kind of a multimodal analysis, analyzing images, analyzing language, analyzing themes, all these various perspectives. We can talk about that more if you like later on. Some of the examples that we have in the book of really, really nice analysis is focusing, of course, on tourism and ways in which the tourist representation of Scotland existed in the past, and in the way that they are changing, particularly how they are romanticized, some foods, how new foods are introduced. For example, langoustines, if you think about them, as I said, as I showed you in the beginning, this is not the kind of food that an average tourist would expect when they read the tourist brochure. They wouldn't be thinking of langoustines necessarily in relationship to Scotland. They would stereotypically be thinking of haggis. They would be thinking of that sort of stuff. But Scotland wants to represent itself in the last decades in a very different way. And so we look at what are these different ways? What are these different foods that Scottish Tourist Board would like to be associated with and present Scotland as a country? And then trying to abandon stereotypical foods such as haggis, put them in the second plan and kind of showcase the natural larder to showcase the foods, the local foods, and foods that you can see maybe not so far stereotypically seen to be connected to Scotland, and increasingly more and more, of course. Looking also at established symbols of Scottishness, such as unbrew, whisky, and haggis, and how they change. Do they change? Are they, what they used to mean? Are they useful for the future? Somebody asking on this topic, I think, connected to this topic, how can we best acknowledge our food heritage without connecting to perhaps negative stereotypes and foods no longer popular? I think a great question, and this is precisely what we are trying to kind of figure out, how to use these positive connections that food has to the nation, to gender, if you like, or other things, in order to suggest to people to eat different types of foods that are maybe more healthy, more sustainable, and so on and so forth. Something that Dave already said in the beginning is something that SCAF is trying to do as well. Also seeing Scotland through the lens of the national food policy, what are seen as policy priorities, what food is important and for who, looking at how various national policies try to kind of stir the direction, of food in Scotland from top down. Also, the role of arts in Scotland, analysis of film and how, for example, alcohol, beer, whiskey features in Scottish films, novels in particular. Is this helpful? Is it helpful to kind of marry arts together with other communication? Of course, I would say that it is, especially if you have a positive presentation of particular foods. It would be a helpful sort of, I guess, representation if you can do that. And then we have social media. This is really big, of course. Social media, does social media influence what we eat? Of course, it does. The question is, to what extent? We know that change in what we eat is very slow. People don't just overnight start eating something different, but it does contribute to our change. And local, for example, in this case, we look at how local food is constructed, what is considered as local food. In particular, the paper from Mariam Ishak has a very nice analysis of Instagram and looking at how Instagrammers promote local food. What does it mean to be local food? What is actually local food? Is local food kale that grows in Scotland, or is local food any product that you cook in Scotland? So would it be also, for example, Chinese restaurant meal that you can eat in Edinburgh? Is that local Scottish food? So it's quite an interesting, I think, discussion around this as well to be had. And of course, then looking at how the US diaspora sees and identifies themselves with Scotland, and perceives these foods as part really of their identity still. In that, even though they are so many generations maybe away from living in Scotland physically, they still have a very strong association to that. So these are some of the examples that we cover in the book. The book is not yet finished at the moment, but what I'm trying to do really here right now, given it's a webinar, is to maybe open a discussion on this topic. And I would be very, very interested in hearing later on, if the discussion is going to be later on how you understand this relationship between the national identity and and food. What you think is happening now, and how can this understanding help us, in particular, with messaging, positive messaging for the better food future, which I think is the goal of all of us, in particular in SCAF. So I'm going to finish here with this really brief presentation and hand it over to Dave. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Anna. That was really interesting, and I look forward to reading your book when it's out next year. So, as you said, we're gonna have questions at the end, but the things that you mentioned there were actually things I was thinking as you were talking. Those were things that I'd be interested in asking. But now we're going to move on to our second presentation, where we're going to hear from both Dr. Lindsay Middleton and Peter Gilchrist. So Lindsay is a literary historian of 19th century food writing and knowledge exchange associate at the University of Glasgow. Her work explores how recipes and cookbooks act as literary artefacts and how food history can contribute to cultural and economic conversations today. Peter Gilchrist is a Scottish food writer and the Guild of Food Writers Best Newcomer 2024. Writing is Tenement Kitchen. Peter focuses on Scotland's working class food stories and ancient food traditions, and is co-director of the Scottish Food Heritage Symposium. So together, they're going to be talking about their work on the Scottish Food History podcast and reflecting on food's role in communication, heritage, and identity. And with that, Lindsay and Peter, over to you.
Thank you so much, Dave, and thank you, Anna, as well, for a really interesting talk, which I think our talk will follow on quite well from, because Peter and I are sort of actively engaging less in the kind of academic study of this communication through food, but actually in doing so ourselves using food heritage. So for our paper, I'm just going to quickly sort of give a brief overview of how our work and collaboration started, and then we're going to be talking about the podcast, but also the other ways that we're kind of trying to use food to engage people with Scottish heritage, ideas of national identity, and sort of engage in some of that positive messaging, which Anna was talking about earlier. So my work with Peter was sort of born from my role as a knowledge exchange associate at the University of Glasgow, where I'm involved in building networks of sectoral partners and academic researchers in order to try and work out how arts and humanities research can help solve sectoral challenges. We call this the partnership catalysts, and one of these which I lead on, is around food. So we've been running since 2022, and basically it's a kind of network of people, some of whom in this room are in it, who come together, and through a series of initial workshops, we try and identify challenges across the sector and see how arts research in particular can address them. Now, the Food Catalyst was a really, really rich experience for me. It helped me build the networks I already had. It kind of led me to joining SCAF, where I'm one of the leads with Anna on the culture theme. And what came out of this were several sort of themes that we wanted to focus on. We had several collaborations between academics and external partners working on various things around food. And it was through the Catalyst that I came to meet Peter. So the Catalyst involves various partners from the Scottish Government down to independent charities. And because we have this kind of arts and humanities focus, the projects and the issues that came out of it tended to circle around culture and tourism, and how food heritage in particular can be better represented and better researched and better engaged with in order to improve these things. So whether that's visitor experience at a historical property, or whether that's when people actually coming to Scotland for the food rather than sort of other experiences that food's just tagged onto. We found, again, as Anna was saying, there were several gaps around the way that food was sort of intersecting with the wider portfolio of Scottish experience. So one of the things that we initially did was we put together the first edition of the Scottish Food Library, which was an attempt to map activities going on in this sector, which is again another priority for SCAF. Now we kind of just managed to scrape the tip of the iceberg here because there's so much going on. But what that revealed was that food is a massively untapped resource in terms of not just things in the health nutrition sector, but also things around our cultural understanding, around our tourism offering. So it was through the Catalyst that I met Peter, and he came to one of the events, and we sort of bonded over a love of cookbooks and recipes. And it was then that we sort of started collaborating and doing our work on Scottish food heritage, some of which you can see here. I'll let Peter come in now, but I've got a little QR code to his page, and we operate a lot, interestingly enough, based on what Anna was saying. We use our social media to do a lot of this work. So Peter, do you want to come in and just sort of chat around that early experience for you?
Yeah, so I mean, what I'll maybe say, I think there's maybe kind of two overriding factors in the work that we do. For myself, I grew up very working class. I grew up in Paisley in the 90s, and I never saw the food that I grew up eating being celebrated or even included really as part of Scotland's pantry to be proud of. And when I began writing about food, I was really focused on global food trends and trying to prove that I now had money and didn't have to live in shame. However, I then had that very classic thing of my last grandparent passing away, inheriting a bunch of family recipes, and beginning to write about why do I eat the food I grew up eating? What is the story of Scottish food? And that's when I began to get interested in history, and at that same time came to work with Lindsay on some food history projects. The other factor I think that's overriding here is that it's so underfunded as a study, as a field, and we are kind of two people who would love to be just working on food history and just researching and talking, but actually there's a need for us to develop projects that proves the worth of Scottish food history in a community sense, in an economic sense, in a wider kind of way that the way that food can impact self-esteem and can help to repair some of our broken food systems. So yes, that's kind of where we ended up And the first Scottish Food History Symposium, which was last year, was really about kind of putting a line in the sand and saying, where are we? Where have we been? Who wants to be involved in this sector? Let's just talk and make connections and network. And out of that then came a report called Beyond the Tartan Tin, which really looked at trying to push beyond the image of Scottish food, which I think most people can agree can be quite reductive. It tends to be whiskey, a tartan tin of shortbread, maybe like haggis or venison on like a pewter plate that's served on a red tartan table. There's like an image that you can't get past. But actually, kind of the overriding point in this report is there is such economic value if we consider the tens of billions of pounds that's brought in through whiskey, through seafood, through confectionery in Scotland. Right across the board, their big unique selling point is heritage, it's story. And currently, no money is invested in food heritage. What would the impact be if we were able to have more meaningful discussions, more meaningful research to push beyond that tartan tin, to push beyond the same stories we've heard a million times and begin to meaningfully talk about Scottish food from our past?
So at the first symposium, we had a sort of range of both academic and non-academic speakers, folklorists, storytellers, and we had local food producers from the area. And it was, it was a sellout event. We had funding from Renfrewshire Council. And what we did in order to produce this report was sort of do a bunch of evaluation to try and drill down into what people understood as Scottish food. So we asked a bunch of questions about like, what do you associate Scotland with? What would you like to see more? And we ended up landing on these sort of recommendations for Scottish food heritage, which is basically underpinning a lot of what Peter and I are doing at the moment and continue to do. So as Peter was just saying, we think there should be a proper funding stream for Scottish food heritage. I'll go on in a minute to talk about our symposium this year, which we just did, but and again, preaching to the choir here in terms of academic funding, we're really just sort of operating on a case-by-case basis without any sort of ring-fenced allocation for food heritage in particular. We also thought it would be wonderful if there were food heritage officer posts, whether that's coming from like Scotland Food and Drink or elsewhere. But then these latter three aims are the ones that are really driving our work because that's the space in which we can operate. So we have the creation of a series of events that champion regional Scottish food heritage, which we're doing through our symposiums. We wanted to create a network of chefs and content creators, historians, food producers and businesses who have a stake in Scottish food heritage. And then we want to create food heritage education programs. So it's in these areas that we're trying to work in order to create the value, create the business case, the research case for more attention to be paid to Scottish food heritage. Because as we can see, if you look at things like the whiskey industry, if you look at things like how Robert Burns operates in the Scottish economy, if Scottish heritage is done well, it can be a really, really beneficial economic resource. So Peter, you touched upon the first Scottish Food Heritage Symposium, which we held in Paisley, and then we just literally at the end of March delivered our second annual Scottish Food Heritage Symposium, which we partnershiped with Macintosh at the Willow for, and the topic of that was tea. So do you want to talk about our plans to sort of like how that went and our plans for taking these forward?
Yeah, and again, it's kind of as we're always trying to prove the worth of Scottish food, we wanted to find partners to kind of experiment with different ways of holding this food symposium. At its core, it's about trying to get food people in a room together, and so we can be a little less lonely in our field, to be perfectly selfish about it. But then also to provide opportunities for people that might be interested in food heritage to come into the fold and develop a deeper understanding. We think there's a lot we can do with food heritage as a tourist offering, and again, having some more of those really meaningful conversations. With this year, we wanted to narrow the field a little bit so that we could be slightly more focused on an aspect of food history, and so we chose tea and partnered with Macintosh at the Willow. What we try to do through the tea symposium is to look at Scotland's relationship with the rest of the world. So we had people talking about traditional Japanese tea ceremonies. We had people talking about tea in media. And again, we had people talking about things like gingerbread and tea cakes and how those evolved through the kind of long 19th century. Again, another aspect that we tried to use, or one of the ways that food is incredibly powerful, is it's really good at opening people up to conversations, or it can make people feel very safe so you can begin to have difficult conversations. So when we're looking at tea, we talked a lot about Catherine Cranston, who was the woman who invented the tea room, and we don't talk about her enough. We don't talk about Scotland's legacy of female entrepreneurship. We also perhaps don't talk enough about our dark history and the relationship that we have with colonialism, with the transatlantic slave trade, and food is a really great tool for opening people up to those conversations on a one-on-one, on an individual level, but it also allows us as a nation, I think, to be able to take forward conversations, really important conversations.
Absolutely. And I think what's important about these symposiums and about our collaboration in general is we're kind of not operating in a solely academic space. These are public-facing free events, like both of them have been sold out. And as you can see from some of the snippets, they've received a lot of media attention. We continuously kind of are growing that side of things, and it's not just social media, it's up to national media, television media, as well as print. And I think we're trying to use this to show that people are really interested. We can use food heritage as not just a sort of entertaining, fun thing to engage with, although we think it's that too, but it can be really powerful as an educational tool. So we're continuing to work with the Trust to develop education packs, and hopefully a further collaboration if we get funding for a symposium next year. And it's all about how we can kind of not reposition, but kind of amplify the value of food within these spaces that people are already engaging with, in order to do what our partners want to do what the public are enjoying, but better using food. Another thing I wanted to talk about, which I'll maybe pass to Peter, is quite a good example of the use of social media as a tool for food heritage. And this was something that we did 2 days before the food symposium, because apparently we just enjoy pain. But Peter, you can talk about why we chose that date and what World Bannock Day was.
Yeah, so I mean, this all really centers around a woman called Florence Marion McNeill. For those of you in food heritage, I assume you're already well versed. Florence Marion McNeill wrote a book called The Scots Kitchen, and it is one of the most important historic documents of Scottish food that we have. She's the most remarkable woman that, if you've never heard of her, we have a podcast which we'll come to later. She was a Victorian suffragist from Orkney who spent her life writing reports about sexual health and protecting young women and preserving both the Scottish language with the work that she did with the Scots Dictionary, but also preserving Scottish food. There are things that we cook now because she wrote down the recipes 100 years ago. So we decided that we wanted to try to create some sort of day where we might try to talk about Florence and her work. And what we arrived at with a group of journalists and artists and creators was World Bannock Day. Bannocks, for those of you who might not know, it's an unleavened oat bread that comes in every shape and size, from thin oat cakes to sort of fruited, mounded loaves that are cooked in pots. And we put out a kind of call on World Bannock Day on the week leading up to March 26th to say, if you're a Scot anywhere in the world, then bannocks are yours. You can claim them as part of your cultural heritage. And the act of making a bannock is a cultural act. And this is one of the ways that we believe that where food can be very powerful, and allowing people not only in Scotland but around the world to feel more connected to themselves, to develop an identity of, national identity of your genealogical story. And so, yeah, we had people from Utah to Perth, Australia, making bannocks and sharing them with family. We had a very tight run up to it this year, and I think for next year we're going to try and develop a bit of a longer campaign. But we chose March 26th because that was Florence's birthday. We felt that there was a real need for us to put women and the accomplishments of accomplished women back into the focus in Scottish foods, and to be able to talk about the contributions of women to Scottish culture, not just in food, but in music, in art, in writing. So this is our first step towards that.
Yeah, and as Peter said, it was really wonderful. So it was mainly on Instagram. It was wonderful seeing people, using the hashtag. We had global participation. We had chefs taking it up, other influencers, and it was really encouraging, given that we did put it together in about a month. So next year, put it in your diaries, and it will be, I'm sure, bigger and better. But just before we close up, as we've touched upon in the title of the talk, we have a podcast. And this again, I mean, I know there are 10 million podcasts in the world, and there are lots of really good food podcasts in the world and good food history podcasts, which Peter and I have both been guests on in various ways. But what there isn't or wasn't was a Scottish food history podcast. So Peter and I decided to plug that gap. We've been running since late last year. I think we began in December with our sort of festive series around Christmas and Hogmanay and food traditions in Victorian Scotland. And we're currently on our Great Scots episode. So you can find the podcast wherever you listen to your podcasts. We cover various topics. It is, I will say, it's history with personality, I think you dubbed it once, Peter, which captures it well. So it's really good fun, but we do talk about various aspects of Scottish history, and we find it to be a really wonderful way of engaging people. I think it's quite an easily digestible media form. You can just plug it in, listen along. We want to be that kind of friendly voice in the kitchen as you're maybe cooking. And yeah, it's been a really wonderful experience to kind of, again, put out academic research, but also personal stories and all those sort of things that food combines in this form and engage with people.
I will say we are terrible podcasters because it's like a prep intensive series each episode, and we have enough stamina to do like 4 at a time, and then we like have a 6-week break while we like try to recover and find more time to record. But please do follow along. I think even just as a food writer, the luxury of being able to spend time to find something new and to spend time researching is sometimes few and far between. And I hope what people get out of it is that we are two people who are very hyper-focused on this very niche part of life, Scottish food history, and that we get genuinely delighted when we can surprise each other with a fact or a story or a part of food history that neither of us has heard before, or that we both actually have heard, and we can like have a tennis relay off each other of facts. I do want to work out who was the one person that gave us a low rating, because we're at 4.9, and so the 13 people enjoyed it and one person's being a grumble. But yeah, it's been a fantastic journey in developing our voice in Scottish food, and yeah, working out exactly what it is that we want to say.
Exactly. And I think it's very much informed by the stories we hear from other people. We have some wonderful guests on the podcast, but also just conversations we have around us with friends, family, other researchers. And so I'm also interested in those questions that Anna asked at the end of her paper around like what you think Scottish food is, how do things become Scottish? And I'm really interested in, you mentioned it, Anna, that tendency to laugh at Scottish food. I think we as a nation have a big sense of humor, but actually sometimes that can be to the detriment of how we take pride in things and represent ourselves. So yeah, I think food is a fascinating medium through which to interrogate those questions, and yeah, looking forward to hearing what people think. But I think that's us. Peter, I don't know if you've got any closing remarks.
No, I would maybe say that again, one of the things that we try to do in the podcast is be very honest about our class differences in growing up, and being able to look at through the lens of both a very working class and, I would suggest, a slightly more middle class upbringing.
Yeah, that's fair.
How those identities helped us to form our ideas of food, and then to be able to smash those together in an episode and see what discourse comes out. That's, I think, hopefully where we're adding value to that conversation.
We also on occasion make each other eat disgusting historical foods, which is always entertaining. So it's worth it for that alone. But anyway, thank you very much for listening and looking forward to any questions.